the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in Him is life. If we obey His word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? It's morning in this part of the world anyway. It is afternoon in other parts of the world. And yesterday we were working on trying to schedule a Zoom meeting and realizing that at some places it would be 2 a.m., other places it would be 7 a.m., other places it would be 4 p.m., such is the nature of trying to schedule things all around the globe like that. So good morning from here in Belmont, Maine, and to you in your part of the world, whatever time of the day it is, greetings to you as well. We are in the book of Acts. The titles have been along the lines of movements, and I was talking to somebody yesterday, and sometimes Western church gets kind of unnerved by terms like movements because we like to control things, and our heart is what we can keep under our controls and managed, and maybe sometimes not so much. And this is kind of a scathing remark and rebuke that I'm making, not so much about the expanding of the kingdom. We tell ourselves it's about the expanding of the kingdom, but then we put lots of roadblocks in the way to keep the kingdom from expanding. And so we have to wrestle through. Now, movements, what are movements? 3 p.m. there in Pakistan today. Movements, it's a 9-hour time difference. Movements are when you see literally thousands of people coming to faith in Christ, and you see the beginnings of new works. You see the expanding of new leaders, and you see that then continuing on. That is a movement. And what we read in the book of Acts is absolutely fits the definition of a movement. Now, we have the generations. We think of generations. How many generations deep is something? Now they are into the third generation of depth. We've gone from Jesus to Peter, and the other disciples and apostles, now to a new group of people who are believing in Jesus. So this is now at least 3 generations deep, and we will see today, out of those, there will be 4 generations deep. And so in our definition, when I say our, I'm talking about those who define movements like concentric, as we define movements, or my friend Emmanuel Prinz and catalytic movement leaders. How do we define movements? We look at 4 generations deep and at least 1,000 people that have been transformed, not just responded to the gospel, but whose lives have been transformed by the gospel. In fact, we go T to the third power, transformation in individuals, transformation perhaps in a group or a congregation, if a congregation experiences change, and we need to pray for lots of change in congregations in the West. And then third, even transformation among the culture or society. So we think about generations and movements, and we see these generations here in the book of Acts, as we're in Acts chapter 2, concluding the sections 42 through 47 today. Again, movements 4 generations deep, transformation to the third power, at least 1,000 people. We see Jesus to Peter, Peter to the 3,000 that respond, and then today we're going to read about other people who respond, making it now 4 generations deep. It can go that quickly, and our prayer, our vision needs to be that things ramp back up and begin to go that quickly. Now, as I'm saying that, I also want to know that sometimes the gospel brings a dividing line. And I was just reading this morning about the Calvary Chapel situation here in Belfast with the Hutchison Center, and knowing that should Calvary Chapel be awarded the building, it's going to be contentious. It's not going to be something, everybody's going to be excited about. Christians might be excited about it, but the non-Christians are not going to be excited about it, and it may lead to some contentiousness. And my prayer is that it doesn't lead to any acts of graffiti or vandalism or things of that nature. That would certainly say a lot about the character of people, would it not? We just need to pray. And I think what can happen is, I think Calvary Chapel can just blossom and flourish for those who say, look, we're tired of listening to all this hubbub on the other side, and we just want truth. Even people who maybe don't really yet quite know what the truth is in Jesus, wanting the truth. And so our prayer is that what takes place there would launch a movement. Lots of ministry to be praying for coming up, and I want to challenge you to mark your calendars for, I think it is May the 1st. In fact, I know it's May the 1st. It is the National Day of Prayer, and I know the local churches here in our area are gathering together in the evening to pray for what God would do in our country and in our world, for spiritual awakening, for revival, and things of that nature. I would encourage you, if you're at all able, to take part in that. If you still happen to be in Orlando in a month, bless you. It snowed last night here again, just lightly, but it did snow. If you happen to be in Orlando, find a church that is gathering together with other churches in the Orlando area, or whatever part of the world you are in. This is a United States-focused National Day of Prayer, because it's called National Day of Prayer. But if you're in another part of the world, you might say, hey, we're going to pray for the U.S. and what needs to happen in the church there. So movements, we've talked about movements. We've defined movements a little bit. Yesterday, we concluded here in the book of Acts, seeing the numbers of people that responded to the gospel down in verse 41. And this is what we read. Let me put it on the screen so you can see it. It says, Peter continued preaching for a long time. Now, he preached for a while, and people said, what do we do to be saved? Then he kept on preaching, strongly urging all his listeners, pleading with them, save yourselves from this crooked generation. Those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church that day, about 3,000 in all. Now, the idea of being added to the church, we're not talking church membership. We're talking about people who are being added to the family of God. Now, there are some denominational groups, and they don't like to be called denominations, but they really are, that do not practice church membership per se, but they do have a standard of accountability. Whether you have a formal membership or do not have a formal membership, the body of Christ should have within it certain aspects of some accountability, some measure, some community to one another. So when they were added to the church, they became a part of the family of God. That's what we're looking at here in verse 41. They became a part of the family of God, about 3,000 in all. That is a substantial number. Oh, that we would learn to pray for the outpouring of the Spirit to happen in ways like that. And it is happening in ways like that in various places around the world. You can go to gather25.com and view some of the videos that are there that show some of what God is doing all around the world. It is absolutely amazing to see. Now, let's pick up in verse 42. All the believers devoted themselves. Now, here are some commitments that they made. Conversions led to commitments. The believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Now, I want to stop right there and talk about the apostles' teaching for just a minute. And the reason I want to talk about it is because we think they had Bibles. Well, they had the oral tradition. They had nothing in writing yet, and that would be forthcoming. What would come in writing, but they didn't have the writing. All they had was the oral tradition. Things had not been written down yet. The Gospels had not been written yet. They had Old Testament was perhaps all they could get access to, and that wasn't something that everybody had in their homes. They maybe had a little piece of scroll, perhaps in the phylacteries, and the phylacteries were the Jewish boxes that they wore on their heads or on their arms that had little tidbits of scripture for them to memorize. That might be the best that they had. They didn't have all of the scrolls. They had to go to synagogue to be able to read the scrolls. But it says the apostles' teaching. We're not talking here about the Old Testament scrolls. We're talking about the apostles' teaching. And it was passed by oral tradition. And then as it was written out, as it was recorded, as the gospel writers wrote what they wrote, and some of this was written maybe a few decades later, actually, not even written at that time, but they began to realize we need to write this down. So some of what was written even a few decades after the death of Christ. In fact, it's believed that some of the epistles may have been written before some of the Gospels. So what did they have? They had the oral tradition. And why am I camping on this? What makes me think about this are our friends in places that do not have ready access to Bibles and all the different teaching that we have. They had the oral traditions, and that's what they devoted themselves to. They would say, tell us more of what the apostles had to say to us. We want to know the story. We want to know the gospel. Well, the question to us that have Bibles is, do we want to know the story? To those of us who have access to television programs like The Chosen or like King David, do we want to know the story? We can watch it in video form. We can listen to it. We can read it. We can read it in various translations. When we have all these tools at our disposal, the question I have to ask myself even is, are we leaning into those tools? This morning I got up at 4 and was leaning into the tools, really the Bible and my notebook, as I'm nearing the completion of the study of Psalms and the character and works of God as revealed in the Psalms. But would we individually be devoted? How is your devotional life? I talked to a young man last night at the Y, and it was a great conversation. I believe God had me go to the Y last night at the time that I went specifically for this conversation. I was just going to the Y because I know I need to go to the Y. I'm dealing with some things within myself, and exercise might be part of the solution, and making sure I'm getting that exercise might be part of the solution to that. But I believe the Lord sent me at that hour because I needed to talk to this young man. And he told me, he said, I've been a Christian all my life. I'm 17 years old and been a Christian, really grew up in the church. And this is the first time in my life I've ever read more than one book of the Bible. Growing up in the church. And you'd think, man, you would have been doing more than that. So I want to, why am I sharing that? I was so proud of him, and he's working at things, and I told him keep going, and he's growing, and he's learning things, and it's exciting for him. And but I want to encourage you, make sure you make time for the Word. You might be in a place where, again, you don't have ready access to the written word. Do like you're doing and find word to listen to. Go with oral tradition. Go with oral teaching. If that is what you need to do, then do it. If that is what is available to you, then do it. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. I mean, that's the first thing. Are we, and these are disciplines, these are commitments that they made, and we will note by the end of the chapter the outcome of these commitments. There was the apostles' teaching, and it is to the fellowship. Now, in my recollection of the Greek, it doesn't just say the fellowship. Let me put this up so you can see it. It doesn't just say to fellowship. It says to the fellowship. Ha is the Greek word that is there. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, the koinonia, the gathering, the being together of one another. They were devoted to each other, and that's something that in Western culture lacks. We get tired of one church, we'll go down the street to a different church, and we have lots of options and lots of places that we can go. But there comes a point when we need to be devoted to our particular fellowship, and that was them. They were devoted to the fellowship, and then it says to. And this is the New Living Translation, to the sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper. I always have looked at this, and my interpretation of this particular part in verse 42 has always been the meaning of the Lord's Supper, that they shared in the Lord's Supper. Now this creates a problem. This creates a problem for those that are more high church. This creates a problem for those that are maybe covenantal in their theology, or deeply reformed, and looking at Calvin and some of the other authors who have taught that really communion should only be served by church officials, by pastors, deacons, elders, whoever is in official capacity. I do not read that in the text. I believe that is extra biblical. What I read in the text here is that they shared in meals, including the Lord's Supper. And if there were 3,000 of them, there was no way that there was always an apostle that was there to serve the Lord's Supper. They broke bread. And so my teaching will continue to be that when believers gather, that it would be a common practice that we would just take the bread, that we would just take the wine or the cup, whatever it may. Some believe you have to use wine. No, I think we need to use perhaps juice or wine and bread. Some believe you can only use unyeasted bread, unleavened bread, because that's what they used at Passover, but they used different types of bread throughout the year. I have taught simply because they did this as often as they did it. They didn't always have unleavened bread. They perhaps most frequently did use wine. I don't think we have to do those things to celebrate communion. The point is that we're commemorating Christ. That is the issue, in my estimation, that we take to commemorating Christ. And it may be with the juice, it may be with some bread, but we do this. And again, looking at the verse, all the believers devote themselves to the apostles' teaching. And again, I don't think with 3,000 people and all the various homes that they had, that the apostles were always in all the homes. But they continued to talk about what they were hearing the apostles teaching. They did not have written text. In our day, we do. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we devoted to the written text? And it says to the fellowship. I've already covered that. To the sharing in meals is how the New Living Translation interprets this, including the Lord's Supper, and I fully agree with that interpretation that the Lord's Supper can be a part of it, and to prayer. That was the other part. They were devoted to prayer. And here's a question for us. Are we devoted to prayer in our church settings? We say we are. If I ever pastor a church again, a local assembly of people, I will not practice as steady form as the main centerpiece, a pastoral prayer. Now, I believe there is some power in a pastoral prayer, but even more important than power in a pastoral prayer is power in corporate prayer among the believers. That's what I would practice. So if I ever were to start a church here in our area again, it would be a Christ Life-based church. It would be Christ Life Church. That would be the name of it. I already have a name. And we would, when we'd come together, we would practice corporate prayer. And that might cause some people to go, I don't want to go there. But I'll tell you what, I think non-believers will come, because I think non-believers are looking for what we have to offer spiritually. And when we take all the spiritual stuff out of the equation because we're afraid we'll turn them off, we're keeping them from getting the very thing they're looking for, if that makes sense to you. So, the important thing, Walter is saying, the important thing is we're doing it as a fellowship of believers. Now, it might not be on Sunday morning. I know in Walter's case, in their church, they have a Wednesday evening gathering, and they have a meal, and I think people pray together. The key is, whether it's on then or at different times, the key is that we are praying together. What were their commitments? The commitments were the apostles' teaching, the word, to the fellowship, the community of believers, to commemorating Christ in the Lord's Supper. This is how I break it down, and to prayer. I'm going to sneeze here. I'm going to go off microphone for just a second. And I'm back. Now, continue reading. It says, a deep sense of awe came over them all. Would we not like to have a deep sense of awe be upon us all? The apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. Now, again, is that something that we need to do? Thanks, Fran. Is that something that we need to do? Perform miraculous signs and wonders? I don't know that it's our power to perform miraculous signs and wonders. However, what I would say is, when there are needs, what we learn to do is stop right then and pray. That is something that we learn to do. Stop and pray. And if God wants to do a miraculous sign or wants to do a wonder, he'll do it. Our part is to stop, to acknowledge, to look to God, to pray, and then let God do what God does. And there may be miracles. I know there are places in the world, and I shared this already in the last few days, where in order to substantiate the gospel, miracles and signs have had to be done. People have been healed and things like that have happened. And the reason for that is to substantiate, to validate the gospel. Our Western mentality tells us that everybody has the Bible. No, they don't. Everybody's heard the gospel. No, they haven't. The evidence of the resurrection and the validity of the Bible's been established worldwide. No, it hasn't. And so God will do what God will do to establish the gospel in among various people groups. Now, continuing through, I want to finish this passage so we get in chapter 3 tomorrow. All the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. So here we see them meeting in one place. And this one place may be synagogue. This may be some public place. They're sharing everything they had. Then we see it says they sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. Now, speaking of those in need, here's an opportunity. Let me just talk about those in need for just a moment. And this is in no way meant to be a political statement. It really is not. But when U.S. aid was cut off and money being given to the UN was cut off, and I think probably for reasonable cause of misuse, the unintended consequence of that is that people in desperate places were cut off from needed aid, i.e. people in the Kakuma village refugee camp in Kenya. People that you've seen pictures of over the last few years. A few years ago, I had pictures of me being in Kakuma village with the people there at the Evangelical Free Church, South Sudan. Well, they no longer have clean water. They need water. They're drinking the water in the streets, and there's cholera and all kinds of disease breaking out as a result. Their rationed food has been rationed even more to where they're barely getting food during the week. Now, I asked Pastor Dominic, I said, can you get access to things? Yes, we can get access, but we don't have money. And because even I mean, they do work as they're able to work in places they're able to work. They do try to do for themselves, but it's such small money. If you would be moved to want to help me send some dollars over to Pastor Dominic, this is the place where we help them build a church there in Kakuma Village. If you recall seeing, and it's nothing fancy, but we help them build a church there that they do meet in. These are the people. And if you would say, hey, I would like to send some money to help them be able to buy clean drinking water, reach out to me. Let me know. You can do it through concentricglobal.org/give. Look up my name and just give there if you would like to make a donation toward some clean water or food. I would send dollars to Pastor Dominic. I've met with him. I've prayed with him. We've continued conversation and dialogue. If you would like to help there. And this, where's this coming from? This is all coming out of this verse. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. I can't think of a need greater than food and drinking water in those places. And Don has put in the comments the link. If you say, hey, I would like to give something toward that, again, find my name, put it under my name at this point, and then we will make sure that happens. That's an opportunity. Now, you might not have to sell your property. You may not have to sell your possessions, but there is an opportunity here to give for this need. And I try to not be a funding source. I don't believe that's my calling. Concentric is not a huge funding source of things of that nature. That is not our intended purpose. We are a training and movement entity to help movements develop, but out of movements, things like support can happen. So I'm not trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I'm just trying to say, as I have lots and lots of friends from around the world, all of a sudden everybody's asking for resources, and that is not the focus. However, in this instance, I would want to help there, and we have given some aid and some love to Zara and her people there, and I won't mention the town, although now it's embedded in my brain, and we do pray for them in their gathering there, that the Lord would be among them in such a strong way. Now, let me finish this passage out. I've gone a little bit long. I got to finish it. It says, they worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper. They shared their meals with great joy and generosity. In many ways, I love the NIV version of this. In fact, let me put this into the NIV version because it's the version I have memorized the most. Here it is. Selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone that had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying all the favor of the people. And now here's this fourth generation. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. They weren't even having to do evangelism. Simply stated, what was taking place was as they were devoted to the teaching, as they were devoted to commemorating Christ, as they were devoted to praying together, as they were devoted to taking care of each other, news of them spread, and the Lord added to their number. Here it is again. Daily, those who were being saved. This is now fourth generation. This is now movement. We see transformation of individuals. We see transformations of entities. Organizations, perhaps the way that they worshiped has now changed. They were still going to temple, but now they're worshiping in a different way. So we see transformation there. And now we're seeing community transformation, 3 levels of transformation. This now is movement. And friends, it's something that I would encourage us to pray that we would be able to be a part of movement in this way, and that we would see movement in Pakistan, that we would see movement here in the United States, that we would see movement all over the world. Yes. And as Fran has said in her comments here, praying the corruption that has decimated U.S. aid is cleansed, and the good deeds from U.S. are reinstated. Yeah, and that would be our prayer. Meanwhile, let those of us who can give do so. And so just an opportunity there. If you want to be able to do that, there's the link. It's there for you. Lord, help us. Help us to be people committed to the things that will bring about movements. Help us to practice the disciplines in our personal lives of time in your word, however we have to do it. If it's listening to it because we don't have written Bible, or for those of us that do have written Bibles, Lord, help us to be devoted to your word, to the fellowship, to remembering Jesus, and to prayer. And Lord, it's our prayer that at the end of this, that you would add daily to the number those who are being saved here in our land and all around the world. Lord, hear our prayer for the honor and glory of Jesus. Have a great day.